Right. Great. Are we good to go, Megan? Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Sustain SC's Technical Assistance webinar for April. We are so fortunate to have Peter Trousdale with us today to share with us what his organization just rolled out last week, the roadmap to strengthening the battery storage supply chain. And this is all part of our technical assistance webinar for ongoing education for our members as well as for the general public. So thrilled to have you here today. Before we get into the meat of the matter, just want to welcome you and let you know what you're in store for today. As I know, we have a number of people joining and we have a few more that'll be coming on board. So if you can, our participants throughout the webinar will be muted. So we just keep background noise to a minimum. And so if you could put your name, location, and your company in the chat to make the introduction of who you are and where you sit and what company you're with, we welcome that. So feel welcome to do that now. And then we're just going to give a brief overview on Sustain SC and a few updates on where we are and how today's webinar is all about our energy accelerator and the work that we're doing in this space. And then we will hear from Peter Trousdale from the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. And after Peter's presentation about their roadmap to strengthening the battery storage supply chain, we'll have an opportunity to have Q&A that will be managed within the chat. And then once Q&A is wrapped up, we will wrap this up with a few announcements from Sustain SC and some next steps for you to be aware of. So on that note, Megan, did I miss anything, or Brent? All right, excellent. So I did acknowledge my colleagues here today. Want to welcome Brent Kosick, who is our Director of Partnerships. Brent will be helping me manage the Q&A after Peter's presentation. And so thank you, Brent, for keeping an eye on the chat, and just let me and Peter know if you see any pressing questions that come up throughout. And then at the end of Peter's presentation, we will dive into deep discussion on the Q&A. A big thank you to Megan Dix, who's our marketing and events coordinator. Megan is our traffic controller here today and helps set up all the logistical details. So thank you, Megan, for being with us. Leslie Scarden, our CEO, and Emily Skaggs, our Director of Sustainability, are traveling for Sustain SC Business today, and send their hello to everybody on the call. And I am Kristen Austin Gunter, the Senior Vice President of Conservation. I've been with Sustain SC now for a year and a half and oversee our work in the Resilience and Conservation Accelerator, along with our Energy Accelerator, which brings us here today. For those of you who may be a little new to Sustain SC, do want to just share with you the purpose of our organization, and really why we exist is to build and grow a more sustainable future for South Carolina here at the intersection of commerce and conservation. And what we do with our mission that we carry out on a daily basis is connecting the sustainability goals of businesses in South Carolina with the local solutions in the state for the benefit of our economy, our environment, and our people. And essentially, through these efforts of our initiatives, our accelerator work, and our programming, we are working towards bringing diverse sectors together for a more sustainable South Carolina. And the way, by doing that, we are so fortunate to have such a diverse membership. We have over 100 members that are represented across academia, public agencies, utilities, companies, and nonprofits that all come together under the sustainability umbrella with the same values. And I really think this is the secret sauce to the organization, is we all have these shared values of doing good and doing it well and doing it together in a collective way and collaborating, because we all really care for our state's resources and want to see our economy, environment, and people thrive and be successful. So we all come with a sense of integrity and respect to have tough conversations around challenging issues that we face as South Carolina grows, and as we also face shifting weather patterns that are really creating more frequent natural impacts. Whoops. And as part of that, if you haven't touched base with SustainSC for a while, I will say in March, we celebrated our 5th anniversary as an organization. And as part of that, we've rolled out an updated strategic framework that really carries out the accelerators that we've been focused on since our inception, and really putting them in these strategic pillars of expanding our economy for a more, bringing together more sustainable businesses to the state who have these shared values, and really focusing on our members, making sure that our members are getting the information and programming that they need to help grow along their sustainability journey. And we're expanding our work in the municipality support and land use planning, recognizing that we can't say sustainability if we don't think about how we're planning for our future in the lands across South Carolina. And all of this really culminates into providing updated trends and data for decision makers across the state, and decision makers being you, making sure that you have the most updated information across a number of different sustainability topics, which really brings us to today, and taking a deep dive into a really important energy topic that around battery storage, and how we handle the supply chain for increasing battery technology across the US and specifically South Carolina, and how to store this effectively. And this is all part of our energy accelerator to provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy in South Carolina. And we do this through holding cross-sector energy forums. And this year we've been hosting interactive workshops to hear from national thought leaders about their recommendations for how to create energy sustainability across South Carolina. And hearing from C2ES recently at our March workshop, we definitely workshopped their ideas that you'll hear about today to see what is suitable in their roadmap for South Carolina. And we're continuing that throughout the series in 2026. We also dive into this work through statewide polling on sustainability attitudes, and providing that information from our polling to legislators across South Carolina, and certainly thinking through how can we create a workforce that is ready for new technologies around energy across the state. So on that note, we are so fortunate today to really do a deep dive on a specific energy topic around the battery supply chain. And we have Peter Trousdale from the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. To introduce Peter, he's the Associate Policy Fellow for C2ES. He supports policy development and program design for the organization's battery supply chain cohort. Prior to Peter's role, he is part of C2S's business engagement team, where he builds out relationships with companies across sectors to support critical advanced technologies for energy purposes. So Mr. Trousdale previously worked for Green Finance Center at the Natural Resource Defense Council, and we're so fortunate to have Peter with us today. The organization just launched this roadmap last week, so hot off the press, Peter will be sharing with us the battery supply chain roadmap. So over to you, Peter.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Kristen mentioned, I'm Peter Trousdale, Associate Policy Fellow with our Regional Clean Economies Initiative at C2ES. We were very lucky to be invited to present at SustainSC's recent Energy Series workshop in Colombia just a few weeks ago. We give you a little sneak preview of some of the recommendations on here, especially those state level ones that we'll be talking about and how those could work in South Carolina. Excited today to really overview the entire roadmap, get into some of the key challenges it's trying to address. And then answer, any questions you have about any of the specific recommendations or how you can get involved in this process. So now I'll start just with a quick overview of our organization. If you could go to the next slide, please. So C2ES is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization based in Washington, D.C. A lot of what we do is designing, advocating for and trying to implement federal policy to support the build out of advanced energy technologies to support our clean energy goals, really the long-term goal of creating a safe and stable climate by accelerating the global transition to clean energy technologies, net zero technologies. As part of this work is our Regional Clean Economies Initiative, of which I'm the Associate Policy Fellow, helping with the policy design and program design there. This program really allows us to take the opportunity to take that federal policymaking conversation and really localize it in states and regions across the countries, working with those stakeholders at the state and local level who are really have the on the ground perspective of where their communities see themselves in different energy transitions and clean energy technologies, both the manufacturing of those technologies, as well as the deployment and utilization of those technologies. So we've convened, I'd say about 25 or 26 roundtables in 23 different states since 2020. And, the program's evolved a little bit since then. We used to do really one-off state conversations, focusing on a specific technology in a specific state, of which South Carolina and the battery supply chain was one. The last of those state-specific conversations actually, and led into the evolution of the program, which is more of a cohort model where we're spending longer in a region on a specific technology, which will take us to our next slide here. So the Southeast Regional Cohort is the chance for us to really dive into the battery and critical battery materials supply chain conversation. This effort has been going on really since the middle of 2024, which started with that South Carolina conversation in Columbia in November of 2024. So really this roadmap kind of kicked off in South Carolina, and we got a chance to bring it back and present with SustainSC here. And through that process, it's really been, years of especially laying the groundwork of what the key problems of the topic are, who the key players and stakeholders we need to engage with, both starting with desktop research, but really hundreds of hours of scoping and informational interviews with key players in the region, developing what outcomes we want to come out of this program, and from there, kicking off with our in-person convenings. So that started in May 2025 in Knoxville, Tennessee. We hosted our kickoff event where we brought stakeholders from across the region together to really build out that network and set the direction of this program. Since then, we've hosted 4 additional state-specific conversations in Alabama, North Carolina, and Georgia. And so through that process, was able to really gather a lot of key information, engage participants directly in policy design conversations, and be able to continue growing that network of folks who are directly contributing to the roadmap that we'll be talking about today, and ultimately bringing a lot of those folks back to advocate for those recommendations directly to policymakers. So that's where we are now. And, I'll get into the specifics of the roadmap at this point, starting with some background. So we go to the next slide here. So what we're really talking about today are batteries. Batteries really are everywhere. All of you are watching this webinar through a battery-powered device, most likely. I would hope so. And so a lot of the most valuable companies in the world right now are battery-powered, from LG devices, Apple devices, different automotive sectors, Tesla, are all really battery-powered companies. What we're really talking about today in the battery space are those larger format batteries that you can use to store energy, power electric vehicles. And especially a big part of this project has been the economic benefit of manufacturing those technologies and the environmental and energy benefits of deploying them. When thinking about battery manufacturing, especially in South Carolina, folks might really think about electric mobility with, many of the automotive manufacturers in the state offering new electric offerings. This is a huge commercial end market for many batteries and is really key to the commercialization and scaling of new technologies, and deploying those technologies. But there are really a bunch of critical applications for batteries outside of electric mobility, especially in the stationary storage space, that will play really important roles in our energy systems. So why C2ES really cares about this is it really is a once in a generation economic opportunity for where a lot of these batteries are going to be manufactured. As well as, the deployment of these batteries will be major facilitators for renewable energy integration into the grid, helping achieve our clean energy and sustainability goals. And so being able to do both of those things, gain the economic benefit from manufacturing these technologies, as well as the environmental and energy benefits, weather resilience, other benefits of deploying these technologies will play a really big role as we continue to create a more sustainable state and country. So we'll move to the next section here. So what we've talked about in regard to the battery supply chain, so we've broken it down really into the 3 categories here, as a lot of people do. All the way from upstream, how do we get the raw materials that go into batteries, both the mining of lithium and other critical materials like nickel, cobalt, manganese. All of these things are really key components of batteries. And some of those upstream extraction processes are even local to the Carolinas, with Elevra Lithium and Albemarle being located in those states, looking to develop processes to serve the battery market, which sort of leads into the midstream here of you have to take those raw materials and process them into the key components that make batteries. So processing lithium into the anode and the cathode of the battery. I won't get too much into the specifics of battery chemistry, but these are really important for the performance and durability of batteries. And then finally, taking those components and putting them into the individual cells, which look a lot like, what you'd expect with your classic AA battery, but really, these are fit for purpose for stationary storage and larger format batteries. And then especially we're seeing, this is where we start seeing a lot of the growth in manufacturing in the region, in cell manufacturing, putting those components into modules and packs, and then putting them in end products like electric vehicles, as well as some major recycling facilities like the Redwood facility in South Carolina that can turn these products at the end of life back into the critical materials that are used to build batteries in the first place. So we'll go to the next slide here. Now that I've talked a little bit about the battery supply chain, I want to talk about where it's really located. Focusing especially on that midstream portion I just talked about, the battery supply chain really is heavily concentrated at the moment, which creates some strategic and supply chain risks to being able to build out and source these technologies, as well as leaving some economic potential on the table. The Department of Energy's LiBridge program released a report in 2023 that estimated the U.S. only receives about 30% of the economic value from any cell consumed domestically. A lot of this value flows externally to the foreign producers of battery components. By comparison, as you can sort of see pointed out on this graph here, Chinese-based companies receive about 90% of the economic value for each cell consumed in China. So there's a big opportunity for us to gain a lot more of that economic value from producing these clean energy technologies, as well as sort of break some of that over-reliance on a single choke point that could, create strategic vulnerabilities, both from an economic and national security standpoint. So as more and more aspects of the energy, transportation, and defense sectors electrify, being able to access secure supply chains and the economic benefits of those will be really important. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. So the region really has benefited quite a bit already at this point from the growth of the battery space. 40% of total U.S. battery manufacturing investment has occurred in the 5 states that we focused on through this project, really demonstrating some aspects of regional clustering of this industry and sort of the positive feedback of building out portions of this industry in the region. So South Carolina especially has been a leader in the space with $6.5 billion across the battery value chain. And I'll get to this a little later, but we've done some economic modeling about the opportunity that could continue to come to the state under the circumstances of supportive policy. So speaking of that policy landscape, going to the next slide here, really a lot of this growth, as shown in the previous slide, occurred since 2021. A big part of that was top-down federal government support for the industry, both through the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure laws that really focused on supporting the build-out of a battery industry in the U.S. This came through the form of tax credits and incentives. I'll throw some tax codes out there at you. 45X was the advanced manufacturing tax credit. 30D was the clean vehicle tax credit. Both of these really provided a signal to companies that it's time to really start investing now in these technologies, and they really showed up in especially the Southeast region in force to start building out battery tech, as well as different loans and other regulatory items. At the state level, similarly, the economic development departments did a really big job in attracting a lot of these companies, as well as different grants, loans, and incentives. Procurement targets for different batteries play a big role, as well as permitting, funding, and other technical assistance for these companies, as well as workforce development training. At the local level, especially when it comes to deploying batteries, the zoning and safety laws are really important. So I'll go to the next slide here. At the federal level, I got into this a little bit, so I'll go quickly here. In terms of the production tax credits, especially for batteries, these are really important. Being able to get tax credit for generating clean electricity. In terms of manufacturing these technologies, 45X is really important and still is important to being able to provide, that extra tax relief for companies manufacturing domestically clean energy technologies. And then finally, especially through the DOE, a lot of grants and loans for both building new manufacturing facilities and deploying this technology locally. So I'll go next talking a little bit about the state policy landscape. South Carolina, as mentioned, already drew a lot of major investments into electric vehicles. And so being able to make sure policy can turn these into real projects is important. South Carolina, I'd say, uses slightly fewer incentives than other states, focusing more on structure, regulation, and utility-led processes. The Public Service Commission really is at the center of this system. So the outcomes of these will really depend on planning and procurement more so than subsidies. It's really not an incentive-driven market, but more of a process-driven market. So this goes to the Storage Policy Act 41 in 2025. Required the Public Service Commission to supervise competitive procurements for battery energy storage and created an integrated resource plan to dictate private development of the public grid. This approach makes the market more predictable, but also limits how fast and big it can grow. Really, if it's not in the integrated resource plan, it's probably not getting built. Next to focusing more on electric vehicles, which also is important to help deploying more batteries and manufacturing them. The companies that offer electric vehicle charging are not considered utilities, which helps create a more competitive market for private charging providers. There's a clear division. Utilities will be managing the grid and private companies own the charging stations. The project success really relies on partnership with utilities and on rate design. Then finally, to the funding landscape, there are only a few direct state incentives. South Carolina does not provide a state tax credit for electric vehicles. There is an EV vehicle registration fee every 2 years, and most funding will come from those federal programs I mentioned earlier. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program funds charging stations throughout the state, and the Volkswagen Settlement Fund supports buses and charging infrastructure. The money's real, but most of the money that's flowing through the state comes from some of those federal programs I mentioned. So what this really means in practice, storage projects really depend on procurement cycles and must fit into the planning schedules mentioned. Electric vehicle projects rely on working with utilities, and working with regulators is required, not just an option. So this market, this is a market where process and timing matter just as much as the capital. So the opportunities are real, but it's very structured. And so there is some need for policy improvements and better regional coordination. Being able to understand the system really provides a great opportunity. So I'll be going to the next section. Now that we've talked a little bit about, the state level landscape, now we're going to go back into the process of developing the policy recommendations we made. So as I mentioned, this really came out of a lot of those in-person convenings. We did a lot of work in terms of getting folks at those conversations to directly contribute to the ideas that went into this policy roadmap. Over the past 5 to 6 months, we've done the work of really synthesizing these findings into both the key problems we're trying to address, as well as the policies that can help do that. And from that work, developed the regional policy roadmap, which just came out last week at our summit alongside the Battery Show South in Charlotte, North Carolina. And at this point, we're working on getting the good word out there and trying to advocate to policymakers about these recommendations that came from all of the local stakeholders we engaged with along the way. So first, we'll go to the next slide here. Talk a little bit about what came out of these conversations. So first, as I mentioned and shown through that really impressive, those investment numbers, is the opportunity in the Southeast is real and remains real. There's a lot of competitive advantages the region has, both in terms of the geography and geology for critical materials that can be used to supply the battery supply chain. In terms of manufacturing, the low commercial electricity rates and land costs helps to build out new facilities. There's a really great research and innovation ecosystem developing in the region, both, especially in the battery space. We'll get to this more, but about CB at the University of South Carolina, as well as some additional programs in Georgia and Alabama. And then finally, we've been really lucky to get to work with a lot of economic development professionals, and their work has been massive in attracting these companies and facilities and the workforce needed to supply them. And then, all of these really lead into the clustering we're seeing. Research centers help drive innovation. The growing advanced manufacturing helps build out the workforce and the infrastructure needed to supply those manufacturing processes, the roads and ports needed to import and export the key products and inputs to manufacturing, as well as a really great workforce development ecosystem demonstrated both in South Carolina and other states in the region. So we'll go to the next slide here. This comes out of that economic modeling I mentioned earlier. We commissioned an analysis with Greenline Insights. I'll demonstrate what that report looks like later as well, and we'll send out the link to that along with the roadmap in our communication to you all. But the opportunity is real in South Carolina. This is under supportive policy scenarios, what could really be recognized in terms of continuing to build out the battery supply chain in the state. And this doesn't include those numbers that I flashed earlier from previous investment. This is forward-looking potential investment from $27.3 billion in the economic output generated through the growth of manufacturing batteries in the state, $5.6 billion in labor income, and almost 70,000 new jobs over the next 10 years. So to realize this, we really need supportive policy. And that was really one of the key takeaways of this entire project, was among stakeholders, the importance of policy solutions, and especially the stability and long-term nature of those policies is incredibly critical to maintain industry momentum in the region and the country. Being able to do this, I think part of that is messaging the importance of this industry to decision makers. Some messages that really resonated with us, of course, the values of deploying more clean energy and making our grid more sustainable is critical to our mission. And you may be leaning forward on the economic benefits that this industry will offer, the national security of sort of decoupling from that Chinese supply chain I mentioned earlier, and creating more resilient supply chains really resonates with certain industry and policymakers as we continue to sort of build out the network of supportive decision makers for clean energy technologies. Across the industry, folks we've talked to remain committed to developing in the US, but this will really require creating more stable long-term policy to make that a realistic option. And, as demonstrated, the Southeast region really is uniquely well positioned to lead in the development of this industry that will play a critical role, in our clean energy future. So I'll maybe go through some key challenges here. So these came out of the conversations throughout the series. I synthesized these from all of those scoping and informational interviews we did, as well as the in-person convenings, and turned those into a set of key challenges that were really the basis of the policy recommendations that we're going to be making. So the first of which, and this goes back to the previous slide I talked about, is policy uncertainty creates a real challenge in being able to make long-term planning decisions for a lot of these companies. Being able to understand what the policy landscape is going to look like in 4 years, especially when a factory can take that long to build, is crucially important for these companies to be able to build that in the United States. And that's really necessary because, especially in that midstream portion of the battery supply chain, the US is nearly fully reliant on foreign refining capacity, most of which located in China and East Asia, which creates really long, complex supply chains, challenging manufacturing. Investment risk is a challenge as well, especially as manufacturers are trying to get new private finance to build out their facilities, and so that goes back to the challenge with the current concentration. It's hard to make an investment in a facility, both when the policy is uncertain, but also the supply chain can be a challenge as well. And all of these facilities, for the most part in the US, are first of a kind. And it takes a long time to set those up. Challenges, it's more expensive than being able to replicate that process again in the US. So continuing on the key challenges on the next slide. Yes, another here is being able to innovate new technologies in the US. The US has been historically very good at this in funding and developing R&D projects and processes, but the challenge we have really is being able to translate that innovation from the research lab to the commercial space. And we've seen a lot of the technologies that have been developed in the US have been bought and commercialized in foreign countries, especially that's part of the way China has been able to grow the industry. The next is related is it's the Southeast lacks some of that critical mass of venture capital investors to commercialize these new battery technologies and work with these companies to understand what they need to scale. And then, these last three here, workforce development, I think this comes up constantly as maybe one of the number one challenges for companies. You saw some of those job numbers earlier, being able to source and train 70 to 100,000 new workers in a single state, obviously is a major challenge. And so, some of the specific challenges around that is the standardization of the skills that these workers will need in the industry, and some of that background technical knowledge that they'll need, so they'll be able to work across new companies in the region. And then finally here, recycling will play a crucial role, especially in sourcing those raw materials for the battery supply chain, trying to eliminate new mining development as we can, and create more circular, sustainable closed loop systems for this battery manufacturing system. But there is a challenge in terms of the collection infrastructure and some other restrictions that make recycling these batteries more expensive than mining new materials. And then finally, being able to grow markets in the US is really important. It goes back to some of the EV conversations we had. This will be a crucial market for batteries to help make it feasible for companies to build new facilities to supply additional stationary storage batteries for renewable energy integration onto the grid. So now we'll get to the recommendations that were designed to address these challenges. To start, we'll go over some of the federal recommendations. I'm starting here with the goals of those. The first set of recommendations are really designed to accelerate both battery production and the growth of the markets they serve, increasing manufacturing capacity and deployment of new battery technology. The second set of recommendations, if you could throw it perfect, would be to coordinate R&D activities, workforce development, and manufacturing advancements, as well as ensuring clear safety standards and the resources to understand them for the production and deployment of batteries. So getting into the specifics of these recommendations, the first recommendation here is to utilize the DPA, Defense Production Act, its flexible financing mechanisms to increase production capacity and offtake for critical battery materials, or find a way to replicate these mechanisms through a new legislative vehicle. This increased funding for production capacity and support to address the challenges of new facility development and the volatile markets for the new materials in the United States will be really important. On the demand side, recommendation to establish incentives for purchasing final battery products using domestically produced materials will be really critical to accelerate market growth and support new manufacturing build out in the short term. A quick aside, the 30D clean vehicle tax credit I mentioned from before was designed to do this, but was eliminated as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year. And so these consumer incentives are really important to providing, that short-term market growth that will help incentivize new investments. The second set of recommendations here um, um, will first is to coordinate safety for battery manufacturing and deployment at the national level. Congress should establish an Office of Battery Safety within the Department of Energy. This will be in consultation with the National Fire Protection Association, ensuring local stakeholders are able to have access to centralized resources and a clear communication with who can help implement those. And then finally, the creation of a Battery Manufacturing USA Institute will help ensure the coordinated development of research, workforce training, and advanced manufacturing are all aimed to meet the needs of industry. Next, we'll get to the state recommendation goals. These, are really able to utilize the governments that understand the specific needs of their states and regional neighbors and designed to achieve three crucial goals. The first here is to help aggregate financial support both at the early commercial stage of new technology development and later in infrastructure and new facility construction. The second goal is to accelerate the deployment of battery storage on the grid to provide clear market signals for producers. And then finally is to centralize efforts and elevate those efforts for battery supply chain development and deployment of new battery technology in each state. So going to the specifics of these recommendations, for background context, these are the ones we were able to go through in the workshop in Columbia just a few weeks ago. So happy to go over these again. The first is establishing a new regional financing entity for advanced energy manufacturing, particularly the battery industry. This recommendation is designed to help catalyze private investment into new battery companies and manufacturing facilities across the region, utilizing multiple financial tools throughout the development and commercialization of new battery technologies. You can find some analogies for this idea in state-level innovation banks or federal-level programs like the Department of Energy's Energy Dominance Financing, previously the Loan Programs Office. The second recommendation is to establish energy storage targets in each state. This would be ideally a regional target, creating some long-term demand certainty for batteries in the region, as well as helping states demonstrate the importance of energy storage to meeting their long-term power growth and usage. This is following the precedent of 13 other states, including Virginia, which just a few weeks ago updated its storage target to be more ambitious and include long duration energy storage. The final recommendation at the state level is to support existing battery centers in each state or develop organizations in states without this existing support. These organizations really are critical hubs of innovation and collaboration between research and industry, serving as centers for collaboration both within their state supply chain development, as well as connecting with critical partners across the region. So our last category of recommendations here is for industry. These private sector leaders are best positioned to understand what their businesses can offer and need to continue growing in the region. We'll go here to workforce development. It's really especially important for these to take the lead on workforce development coordination, helping launch a new generation of workers with the skills needed to grow the industry. These voices are also positioned to lead on messaging the economic development and energy security implications of the battery industry. So going to the specific recommendations, the first is to create a clear certification pathway and standard set of skills to apply to new workers across the industry, ensuring the battery industry has access to a workforce with a clearly defined set of skills that are translatable across companies. The second recommendation is to communicate the economic and energy security benefits of this industry, developing an outreach campaign both for policymakers and the general public to better understand the emerging battery industry. So this is the full roadmap. You can see the text and accompanying brief on our webpage. I think it's the first thing on the landing page right now. This is the full brief text, as well as we have a separate document specifically just for those recommendations I went through. These include really a lot of background on the work we did, the strengths of the region, some of the challenges I went through, deep diving on those from each stage of the supply chain, as well as diving into some examples and justification for the recommendations we made. We're excited to move to the next phase of the program and implement these solutions. Really, a crucial tool in that advocacy effort is demonstrating the economic opportunity provided by the industry. To help provide these tools, our colleagues at Greenline Insights developed an economic opportunity analysis for what the growth of a Southeast battery value chain could provide, given the right policy and regulatory conditions. So would love to include that as we send out the information to you all. There is South Carolina specific information in there, as well as a South Carolina fact sheet one pager that I wanted to include in these slides, but that slide previously on the opportunity in the state covered a lot of some of those highlighted key numbers. Really recommend you taking a look at those and using those for any advocacy ideas or communication that you want to do about the battery industry. So I think my presentation maybe went a little longer than we expected it to, but we saved some time for Q&A here as well. So I want to make sure folks in the audience can ask any questions they have. I know I went over a lot of material there, so happy to dive into anything in specific or talk more generally about some of these topics.
Right now, the only question that's coming through the chat was around if this was being recorded and will be distributed afterwards. And yes, we'll make that available on our website.
Yep, I can also share these slides out as well, and along with the reports, which will, I think, provide more comprehensive overview of what we just chatted about today.
Excellent. And could you provide the South Carolina fact sheet as well? And we'll make sure participants get that.
Yes, definitely.
Great. Well, Peter, thank you so much for this overview. We recently, as we noted, had a workshop in Columbia at the beginning of the month where you rolled out a portion of this roadmap for Sustain SC members to, really talk about the state recommendations that you have. And we workshopped those recommendations and asked participants, out of the state recommendations, which ones seem suitable or viable for South Carolina. The top state recommendation that participants acknowledged was a high priority is really that recommendation about a battery storage center to centralize collaboration around battery storage deployment and supply chain development. So kind of curious where you think great examples of this are happening already, and how's South Carolina doing in that regard?
Yeah, totally. This is a recommendation I'm really excited about. We've gotten through this program a chance to work with, the three major battery innovation centers across the region. South Carolina's really a leader in this with the Carolina Institute for Battery Innovation located at USC. So I think this recommendation really was borne out partially in the desire to continue supporting the efforts that this center offers to the state. And so, I think South Carolina is really well positioned to continue sort of being a hub of this innovation and commercialization for the entire region. And we wanted this recommendation to help sort of support the growth of that center to continue ensuring that it has, long term the resources to grow into a bigger role, essentially. It's already doing great work, and want it to do even more work, basically, and have the resources to make sure to continue doing that. Georgia Tech is another university with a growing battery research and innovation center, as well as the Alabama Mobility and Power Center located at the University of Alabama. And so part of this recommendations to support those centers, growing what they can offer to the private sector, to workforce development, but also crucially, I think, is making sure that there is funding and programs for them to communicate across these centers to make sure that there's real, collaboration in terms of what their strong suits are, what challenges they're addressing, and how they, can help the entire region through their individual efforts. So really excited, I think, about next steps on this. And so we're developing some action plans with the heads of those centers, and looking forward to engaging folks as well who are part of those projects to advocate for their continued growth.
Great. Thank you, Peter.
We have had a few questions come into the chat. So the first one being, are there opportunities to retrofit existing buildings for manufacturing?
Yeah, I think, this is definitely, I'd say, probably more of a question for like an economic development professional, but I can probably provide some background that I've heard. So essentially, there are two types of key sites for new manufacturing facility, known as greenfield sites, which is, more of like an empty field, basically. And then brownfield sites, which is maybe like a previous industrial facility, or, something that already had some sort of industrial process in it. From what I've heard, there are real challenges to retrofitting those old facilities into new manufacturing, and it can be a real headache for economic developers. Obviously, I think there's definitely some preferable reasons to want to turn, old industrial sites into new industrial sites, but the range of being able to do that, I think, is very much a case by case basis based on what the existing infrastructure at that site might have looked like. Highly recommend, if someone at like a Department of Commerce or something interested in site selection. It's a really important part of the build out of new manufacturing facilities, and they'll be able to give you some great context on what that process looks like and the opportunities to do that at one of those brownfield sites that I mentioned.
Great, thank you. So the next one, putting you on the spot, how confident are you feeling about the execution of the recommendations and how doable are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's different levels of near-term viability for these recommendations. Obviously, some of which are more, some of which are maybe more ambitious than others in the short term, but have, I think, the opportunity to be really game changers in the space. Maybe I'll go through from federal level. Right now, starting at federal level, right now is actually a pretty good time to be having these conversations. It's a Republican Congress currently with a Republican president, which makes it easier to pass legislation. And batteries and critical materials right now are a bipartisan issue. And so being able to work with Republican members of Congress is really important on this topic, especially in a state like South Carolina, where there are many Republican members of Congress and 2 Republican senators. It's a great opportunity to engage with them on these federal policy recommendations and have the conversations about how these can help the state of South Carolina's continued economic development through battery manufacturing. So I'm pretty optimistic. I'll pitch this now as we have all the folks on the line, but we're doing a Hill Day on June 10th and 11th, where we'll be taking these federal recommendations and meeting directly with members of Congress. And so if folks want to and can get engaged with that and haven't been part of the process so far, please be in touch. We're going to take care of all the logistics in terms of, hotel blocks, meals, meeting schedules, all the prep material you'll need. Really, we just need you, to show up and engage in these conversations. And it really is a fun time to be able to go meet with your representatives and talk about this topic. At the state level, I'm really optimistic about supporting the battery storage centers. These have been really great institutes for each state. And so finding ways to continue supporting those, I think will have a lot of support from policymakers. Regional financing entity creation and a regional energy storage target is going to take a lot of time and political capital to get done, to be completely honest. But that's a long-term project that we're excited to start now. And then finally, the industry goals and recommendations, the workforce certification and training. This is something we kind of already started at the summit. We had Clemson University running a workshop there about this exact topic, and excited to work with them to help take the lead. And then finally, a messaging campaign. I think this is something we can start right away. We're working with some partners to develop this. And so I think all of these have pathways. It's just about really time frame and workload to get them done.
Great. Does that cover the questions, Brent?
We have one. I don't know if we have time for the final one.
Depends just briefly. Yes, if
I
we
think
could
it
do a
could be addressed.
soundbite answer.
Yeah, so this one is, we have an audience member commenting that in their area, they use lithium batteries. And what is your perspective on how you see the future cost reduction in these projects?
Yeah, I'll just go quickly. I think there are a lot of charts out there right now showing the long-term cost reduction of these products. It's been pretty incredible, really, to see how the cost has gone down and the performance has increased. That's a trend I think a lot of people expect to continue, whether it's as exponential as it has been over the past decades. I don't know, but definitely I think, especially with new innovative centers like SIBI and others developing new technologies, higher performance, lower cost, it's very likely. And as we manufacture these domestically, it also helps reduce costs as well.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for being with us today and rolling the roadmap out. Like we said, this will be on our this presentation and the video of the webinar will be on our website along with the slides, and we'll put the fact sheet for South Carolina up there as well. Please feel welcome to reach out to myself or anyone on the Sustain SC team if you have further questions, and we would connect you to Peter or make sure that you get the information that you need. Thank you, Peter, for being a part of kicking off our energy workshop earlier in the month. We have another one coming up on June 2nd in Mount Pleasant on distributed energy resources. And join us next month for our technical assistance webinar on circular water practices. So you can see all our events coming up on our event page on our website. And you can also follow us and stay updated on what Sustain SC is doing on our social networks. And we do value your feedback, so please fill out the event survey and give us your feedback on how we did. And so together we will continue to bridge commerce and conservation for a more sustainable South Carolina. and grateful to our national partners like C2ES and Peter. So thank you all. I hope everybody has a great day.